Okay, hi everyone. Let me start by introducing myself because I've been watching these recordings of the past meetings, but I wasn't really present here, right? So you probably don't know me. So okay, so I'm you can call me Roberto or Rob. It's okay. I'm 28 years old. I'm from Slovenia in Europe. I speak English, Slovenian, and Italian. I'm a high school graduate, and I studied 3 years at university, three different things. I didn't finish any of them, but I studied pharmacy, mathematics, and tourism. And the reason why I mentioned this is because I always wanted to be a generalist, but I just didn't know what that was in me. I was interested in a little bit of everything, but nothing in specific. I didn't want to become an expert in one specific field. So when I learned about Jacques and what he talked about, about becoming a generalist in the RBE, it made complete sense to me. So yeah, I would like to divide my life in a few phases here, just to give you a little bit of background and why I'm interested in communication. So I started as a very devout Christian Catholic, and so then at a certain point I even wanted to become a priest. But then, later I changed my mind, and I started watching YouTube videos about atheists and stuff, and I became an atheist then, and I wrote it's the depressed phase, because basically my whole world crumbled. So there's no heaven and hell. What the hell am I doing here? What's the purpose of life? So it wasn't a pleasant phase in my life. So I was searching for other groups, for other people that I could identify with, someone that I could, talk to, because I was immersed in a community of religious people and I couldn't talk to anyone about this, right? They, there's one funny event that happened in my life back then. When I told my mother that I became an atheist, she kind of called an exorcist, because, she thought that was the appropriate thing to do, right? So yeah, anyway, nothing happened, but that was her reaction. So I live in a very devout Christian community. So anyway, then after I became an atheist, I thought, okay, that's great, right? I'm an atheist. That's the group that I can identify with the most. However, I found out that apart from the atheist stuff, apart from bashing religion, there was not much else that I was interested in there, right? So I was interested in the scientific method and critical thinking. So I found this Skeptic Society, right, from the skeptic.com. You probably know Michael Shermer and people like that. And so I listened to a lot of their talks and interviews and stuff like this, and I became very interested. Now in these phases there was always something wrong, right? That's why I moved on. So in the Skeptic Society, especially with the people on the forums, where they discussed the most, they discussed things in most detail about, conspiracies, vaccines, climate change, and stuff like this. It seemed to me that they were more interested in ridiculing people and making fun of them, instead of actually trying to explain things, instead of educating them, right? So I was more interested in educating them. So I didn't exactly agree with, the values that they had there. So then I went on, I was still searching for, the perfect group, which never came, but anyway. So I found the Zeitgeist movement. I watched the Zeitgeist movies, and, great, okay, a better world, a new world, the risk-based economy. So I joined there, and there were problems, with the organization, with other things. So then I found the Venus Project, and I said, well, okay, let's try the Venus Project. I had also problems there. I won't go into the detail here. I'll just mention that there were problems. So that's when I left, and then I found the nonviolent communication groups around, right? And yeah, I agreed with them a lot, because they had, they wanted to empathize, they wanted to build a better world through communication, they wanted to use the tools that, Marshall Rosenberg, the one who started nonviolent communication, he came up with a model of communication, how to express your feelings and needs, all that was great. but I didn't find really what I was searching for, which is more, kind of the scientific method, being a critical thinker. There was a lot of spirituality there, and other pseudoscientific stuff. So I wasn't very interested in that. So anyway, then I moved on, and right now I'm in this group called IDTRA. It's basically an organization that deals with the transition, how to transition from here to a resource-based economy, or to generally a better society. And I'm creating courses there on communication. So I think right now that the purpose of my life, okay, first of all, I don't think there is a purpose to life, like, trying to find it somewhere else. I think you are the one who determine your purpose of your life. So for me, it's, improving myself and others. I think, helping them, educating them, giving them the tools to think differently, and also learning and exploring, the vast expanse of the human knowledge, because there's so much to know. And I'm so interested in knowing, a little bit of everything, not becoming an expert. I would much rather be, a jack of all trades than a master of one trade, right? So my interests right now, sorry for the language. So, I'm interested in communication, education, critical thinking, scientific literacy, philosophy, also psychology, linguistics, especially the language that's not subject to interpretation. When I heard about that, I was, oh my God, that's what I've been searching for, right? So, and then alternative socioeconomic systems like the RBE, of course, that's why I'm here, right? Okay, let me go on. Okay, so I was interested in, I reviewed a little bit of what people thought, how to reach a resource-based economy, what to do, right? And don't worry about, everything that's written here. I just wanted to, to kind of write down everything that went through my mind. So there are so many things, people want to promote the RBE online, then offline, on the streets, to family, friends. Then, TVP has the 3 phases, right? The movie, city, theme park. Then some people want to go off-grid in self-sustaining communities, grow their own food. Some want to promote UBI, and they say, together with technological unemployment, we'll eventually get to a resource-based economy. Others want to promote, technologies like 3D printers or other, technologies that make us self-sufficient, basically automation, technology to automate things. Then others want to educate about the RBE to increase awareness, like me, for example, or critical thinking and science in general. I think even, even if we could raise the scientific literacy of the general public, even that would be, even if we never talked about the RBE itself, even that would bring us, closer to that, because it would make much more sense to people, right? So then, I won't go through everything, but, there's a lot of things. They're creating a political party, someone to focus on becoming rich, and then funding projects and so on. Yeah, I heard someone. Did someone have something to say? Oh, okay. Yeah, someone just joined. Hi. So what this shows me, all of this, when I look at this list of things that could get us to a resource-based economy, I'm asking myself, so what's going on here? What's the common theme here? So what I see here is basically, all of these things rely on communication, right? We can't do anything alone. So one of the events that had a big impact on my life was when TZM and TVP split up, right? Probably also on some of you. So I thought, if they can't solve their own problems, how the hell can we expect anyone else, right, to solve the problems of the whole world? So that was disturbing to me. And so I wanted to find a solution or something that would make sense of that. So I thought, well, TVP and TZM, they both have the same goals, right? But they couldn't, as far as I understood, they couldn't communicate very effectively, because, and in that famous meeting where, the Venus project split up with TZM, they said that they basically they wanted to now I don't want to go into the details, but just to mention that Peter Joseph didn't communicate properly with Jacques and Roxanne, and so there were some problems there. They wanted something, but they didn't. Apparently, they didn't express it very well. So Peter Joseph went into a different direction, and so on. Anyway, not to go into that, but what I got from it is that we need to improve our communication. Right? There's something wrong with the communication there because we obviously have the same goal. So Okay, so let me go now into the pyramid of communication. I took this kindly from a Coursera course that I took on communication science from the University of Amsterdam. So this pyramid of communication basically, divides the communication in different types. So roughly, right? We can divide it on how many people are involved. So on the bottom, you will see intrapersonal communication. This is basically thinking, right? When you communicate to yourself, this is basically a type of communication, right? We do communicate to ourselves. So, and this, the intrapersonal communication is really the foundation of all communication, right? Because that determines then how we, our interpersonal communication, the communication between people, then communication in groups, in institutions, and finally in a whole society, right? So I was really interested, I'm interested in intrapersonal communication because that's basically what determines our mindset, our worldview, values, the philosophy of life, right? And I think that's very important when we want to think what kind of values would we have in a resource-based economy? What will get us there? So I'm very interested in this topic. So how can we improve our communication at these different levels? So, and I think we need tools, mind tools. Okay, so, I was thinking, so we need to know how our language works. We need to know a lot of things. We need to know how to think critically. We need a set of goals, attitudes, and values. So, and I wanted to categorize it into basically three things, right? So first you have the mindset, goals, attitudes, values, behaviors. Then you have basically you need to know some facts, right? You need to have some knowledge about the things that you want to talk about. Then you need some tools and Okay, this is how I categorize it, right? So just like when you want to build, let's say you want to build a house, right? You need the blueprint, you need the material, and then you need the tools, right? If any of those is not present, you're going to have a hard time building a house, right? So here are the tools that I mentioned. There are 4 tools, which I'll be presenting more deeply today. I mentioned there are nonviolent communication, language and general semantics, logic and argumentation, and persuasion. So I won't go too much into details because, obviously this is a brief introduction. But I think it's important that we at least know that they exist, right? So that when you're searching for the appropriate tools, you'll be able to know that these tools exist and you can learn more about them and improve your communication. So, okay, to go into the metaphor, right? Let's say you want to build a house. So first you need a blueprint, right? Then you need the raw materials, then you need some tools. Then you put them all together and you get, a tricycle. So, things don't always go as you planned, right? So, and also if you see the blueprint, the material and tools are completely wrong, but anyway, this is just, So, but one thing that, of course, we would agree with is that the better equipped you are, the better are your chances of succeeding, right? So you're never guaranteed 100%. To be always successful in every single conversation that you have, but you're more likely to succeed, right? If you are prepared and you have the tools and a particular mindset, right? Okay, so let's start with nonviolent communication. I think this is really the mindset here. So I know that we already had a presentation on NVC, right, the nonviolent communication. So, but I wanted to go a little bit more deeply into the foundations to show really the the worldview, right? Because I think it's very important. From this, everything else comes out, right? All the other types of communication are based on this. So Marshall Rosenberg, to say a few words about him, he was an American psychologist, mediator, author, teacher, and also a peacemaker in conflict zones all around the world, right? So also, especially in the Middle East and in Palestine, he had a very big impact on people's lives there. So, you know, I consider NVC to really have proven itself to be a solid technique, you know, for conflict resolution in general, because, you know, it's been extensively field tested in the harshest environments. So, you know, this really lends credibility to the technique, right? So Marshall Rosenberg developed nonviolent communication as a process of resolving conflict in 3 different ways. Conflict within people, like in psychological problems, you know, the stuff that psychotherapy usually deals with. Then conflict between people, like in relationships, organizations, businesses, parenting, education, healthcare, prisons. And also conflict between larger groups of people, like, you know, when different tribes or nations or countries are at war, they need mediation and negotiation. So, you know, NVC really spans the whole pyramid, you know, that I showed earlier. It's really useful. Now, an important thing to realize about NVC is that because of the name, nonviolent communication, people think that it's just about communication, that it's a, you know, it's a model of communication and nothing else. But really, it's actually much more than that, right? As I said, it's kind of it's a worldview, a mindset. Some even call it a spiritual practice, right? Because of the benefits that it gives. You could call it a set of values. It's also a parenting technique, an education technique. I saw documentaries on YouTube and on the internet where, you know, teachers use this in schools and how they solve conflicts. So it's really useful technique. So you say, okay, so NVC is a lot of things, but what exactly is it? So I put down here 7 principles. You know, they're not like commandments or anything. You don't need to memorize them. You just, you know, the 7 of the very important beliefs which NVC rests on. And this is really what sets the mindset, right? So first, human beings have the capacity for compassion. Now, maybe not exactly all humans. There are some extreme cases, but certainly almost everyone you'll meet. So, you know, compassion or empathy in this context means being able to understand other people's feelings. Not necessarily that you feel their feelings, you know, but that you just understand them, like cognitively. And, you know, even psychopaths can do that. So that's the first principle. The second principle is all human behavior stems from attempts to meet universal human needs. So whatever we're doing, we're trying to meet human needs, right? That's the reason for our behavior. Third, we only resort to violence when we don't recognize more effective strategies for meeting needs, right? So especially if you watched some of James Gilligan's videos on violence, he's that person who worked in prisons a lot with violent criminals. You know, he really says that his research shows exactly this, right? That people don't just resort to violence by default, that they have to be cornered in some way, you know, mentally, psychologically. So, you know, when they don't know how else to solve their problems, you know, it's really about desperation on a certain level, right? They don't see any other way, right? So, and that's why they resort to violence. You know, violence takes energy, right? It has an impact on a person's psychology. So it's not just that people enjoy violence. People who do enjoy violence, you know, that's a different thing. There are much more, you know, deeply rooted problems there. So, but which gets us to the next one, which is number 4. Habits of thinking and speaking that lead us to the use of violence, psychological and physical, are learned through culture. Right? And that's exactly what Jacques said, that we're not born violent or bigoted or anything. We learn that through culture, you know, and that's what happens, unfortunately. You know, we're all born, you know, with the ability with the capacity for compassion and all of that, but then culture, you know, changes us. So principle number 5, needs are never in conflict. So we all have the same needs, right? There's no need where, for example, I would have a need for friendship and safety, and you have a need for enemies and danger, right? So that's not something that happens. So all our needs are compatible, right? Only strategies for meeting needs can conflict, right? That's what happens. So say you want to go out partying, right? But your partner wants to stay at home and watch the TV, right? Now you might think, okay, our needs conflict. No, you have a need for recreation and fun, while your partner has a need for relaxation, right? Those needs do not conflict. We all have those needs at different points in our lives, during the day, right? So what happens there is that we're searching for strategies, and one of the strategy is, okay, let's stay at home and watch the TV. The other one is, let's go out partying, right? So that's what conflicts, right? The strategies for meeting the needs. So what you should do is not fight about it, or try to coerce or manipulate your partner to do what you want. Instead, you should recognize the feelings and needs of both you and your partner and find something that works for both of you, right? So there are many creative solutions that you can come up with, like maybe you can invite some friends over for a chat, you can watch a fun movie together, maybe you can go somewhere where you can both relax and have fun, or maybe you don't even necessarily want to spend that whole night together, right? So there are many different things that you can do, and the strategies are the things that conflict. You just need a little bit of creativity in order to come up with a strategy that meets both your needs and the needs of your partner, right? And the last principle I'll mention here is, if people can identify their needs, the needs of others, and the feelings that surround these needs, harmony can be achieved. So basically here, this is, in a nutshell, the recipe for a peaceful world, right? This is also, it's a central belief of NVC, right? So it's what NVC relies on, and I think most people here would agree, right? That if we can build such a world where we look at, we take care of everyone, we take care of their needs, then that's what gets us to a better world, to an RBE, right? I don't know. I don't believe there's any other way. Like, there are no good and evil people, and we just need to, kill all the evil people, and then only the good ones will, remain. So that's not true, right? Okay, so these are the principles on which NVC is based on, but how do we use them in our lives? So is there a simple model that we can follow, something that's easy to remember and use? Well, unfortunately, yes. So here's the model. It's okay. Here it's it's a little bit strange on my computer. It was a bit different, the formatting. But anyway, so the 4 components of NVC, which Marshall developed, are observations, feelings, needs, and requests. If you want to memorize anything, these are the 4 things to memorize, right? Now, what do they mean? So, observations. When you're making observations about something that happened, about what someone did, or what someone said, or what you said, what you did, or what you thought, right? You have to make observations without mixing in evaluations or judgments, right? That's not easy to do, it's easier said than done, but once you learn how to do it, it becomes, quite automatic. So observations are what we see with our eyes, what we hear with our ears, what we touch with our hands, what we smell with our noses. Those are the observations, right? Observations are not what you think about something, right? That's different, or how you evaluate or judge something. So let's say you see someone take your pen and not return it. Don't say he stole it, or he doesn't respect me, he doesn't respect my things or my privacy. Just make an objective observation and say, he took my pen and he didn't return it. We often imagine the worst possible motives for people's actions, right? When in reality, it could just be that, the other person just had so many things on his mind that he simply forgot, right? And he didn't mean any disrespect. So observing without judging is the first step for using NVC. Right? Feelings. In order to use nonviolent communication, we need to be able to recognize feelings. Our feelings and the feelings of others. this is really what enables us to be compassionate, right? It's what makes us human and recognize other people as human. So we have to recognize again that feelings are not judgments or evaluations. You know, I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel angry, disgusted, lonely, surprised. Those are feelings, right? But sometimes we say things like, I feel you don't love me. I feel I didn't get a fair deal, or I feel like going shopping, or I feel like punching you in the face. You know, those are not feelings, right? Even though they use the words I feel, those are not feelings. That's a problem with the language, right, that we use. So we need to separate our actual feelings from our thoughts, judgments, or plans for what we want to do, and so on. There's a list of feelings. If you just Google NVC feelings, you'll get a list of feelings. And I think that's probably the best way to learn about what are feelings and what aren't, right? Anyway, let's go to the needs. So just like with the feelings, there's also a list of needs, you know, to help you with separating needs from strategies. Needs are the same for all people, as I said earlier, and they never conflict. So we have needs for well-being, health, autonomy, peace, acceptance, belonging, safety, honesty, recreation, purpose, celebration, and so on, just to mention a few. Now, strategies, on the other hand, they're the specific ways or actions which we employ to meet our needs, right? So we eat food to meet our need for health. We communicate with people to meet our need for connection. We join groups to meet our need for belonging. We play games to meet our need for recreation and fun, and so on. But strategies are not fixed, right? Needs are fixed. We all have them. They're universal. Strategies are not. We can meet our needs in countless different ways. If one strategy doesn't work, if we can't implement one specific strategy, we can find a different one, right? So sometimes people think, you know, just to mention this specific example, because it was something that also Jacques mentioned in one of his lectures. So sometimes people think that they need some specific person in their life, right? Like a family member or a partner, because they love them so much and they're very attached to them. But Marshall and Jacques say no, right? People die, and when that happens, your life doesn't end there. You can meet your need for love and attachment in many different ways with different people, right? It's not the end of the world. When you really believe that, or when you deny, you know, that that's how things work, then you're really creating psychological problems for you, right? And I mentioned this because there's Jacques talked about this at length in some of his lectures, right? Also about expectations. Okay, to go to the requests. So when we make requests, we should make requests when we have a particular strategy in mind, right? That will meet our needs, and we'd like someone else to help us meet those needs, right? We can also make requests from ourselves, but okay. But requests, again, they should be expressed in a clear, positive, and concrete action language. That means we should avoid saying something like, I want you to understand me, right? That's not clear or concrete. That's very vague, actually. Instead, we should ask for a specific action, like, I want you to tell me what you heard me say. Now, this is something that a person can do, right? They can repeat back what they heard you say. Instead, if you just say, I want you to understand me, it's like, what, how to understand you, right? It's not very clear. So another example, if you say, I like to be honest with me, again, it's not very clear what exactly you want. So a clear request would be, I'd like you to tell me how you feel and what you think about what I did, right? For example, right? So it's much more clear. It's an action that a person can take. So also the requests need to be in positive language. This means that you should ask for what you want instead of what you don't want, right? So instead of, I want you to stop being so loud, you should say, I want you to lower the volume of the radio in your room, or I want you to speak more quietly. So you're making it clear what exactly you want, right? And you're not judging them. You're not saying, oh, you're loud. Then, you know, people become defensive. So lastly, requests are not demands, and this is what I put here in the slide. So if someone says no to your request, you shouldn't try to force them or coerce them to do it anyway, right? That's what demands are. You demand something. When you request, you're open to hearing a no. And here's the thing. So when someone does say no to your request, you should try to find out why they said no, right? What's preventing them from saying yes? So you should ask them about their feelings and needs. You should empathize with them. Don't just assume that they said no without a reason, right? There's always a reason. So, and sometimes it's a very good reason, one that makes you change your strategy, your request, you know, so you should keep that in mind. Try to find out why they said no, you know, or why someone cannot or doesn't want to meet, to help you with your request, right, to fulfill your request. Okay, so now this model here, you know, the 4 components, they're not just for empathizing and making clear observations and requests. You know, this model is also a very powerful persuasion tool, not manipulation, but persuasion. So by expressing your feelings and needs and listening to others' feelings and needs, you create a deep connection, right? Which is one of the best way to approach how you persuade people before you even try to persuade them about some specific thing, right? Because what you're doing is you're creating a deep personal connection to that other person. So, okay, here's a question. You know, this is something I wanted to mention about because it's very interesting. So, which job requires you to be very persuasive, right? You might think a salesman, marketer, advertiser. Sure, what's the price if you fail in those, you know, in those jobs? Well, you don't sell a car, you lose your job, you know, or something like that. So is it stressful? Yeah, sure. But how about if you're a hostage negotiator? You know, imagine how stressful it would be, you know, when you fail there, people die. So, you know, if there's any job that really requires you to be highly competent at persuasion, it's definitely this one. And so I wanted just to show you here. This is, here's a chart that summarizes how hostage negotiation works. You know, it's just the main points. And, or here it's called crisis negotiation, but it's the same thing. So if you really go through it, you'll see that it's basically just a special case of nonviolent communication. It focuses on the negative feelings instead of the whole range of them, because, you know, that's what happens when people take hostages. So, but this really, you know, again, it lends a lot of credibility to NVC when even hostage negotiators use basically a special version of NVC. Anyway, this was just to mention something. Okay, let's go to the problems with language. So, you know, let's say now you know how to communicate nonviolently, resolve conflicts, empathize with others, and build rapport. How do we proceed to discuss topics in order to learn more, to gain clarity, to make good decisions? We need to express ourselves in language, right? But obviously there are problems with language that we need to be aware of. So Jacques talked a lot about how our language is old and insufficient, and that in the resource-based economy we'll need a new language that is not subject to interpretation. He made the example of different people reading the Bible and getting different messages out of it. And that's why there are, you know, Catholics, Lutherans, Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, and so on. So what are the problems with language? There are many of them. I mentioned only a few of them here, just to give you a taste of what general semantics deals with. So I'll mention these ones. Ambiguity, you know, you probably all know what this is, but there's also a special type of ambiguity, syntactic ambiguity. There are weasel words, there are absolutistic terms, black and white terms. And there's also 2 more complex topics, which I'll go more into depth. They're called bypassing and identification. These are concepts in general semantics. So let's go to ambiguity. You know, so here's an example. We saw her duck, right? What does that mean? Are we talking about her duck as in, you know, the animal, or the motion that she did with her head, like she ducked a ball, right? So this is, you know, the very simple type of ambiguity where a word has multiple meanings and we don't know which meaning is the correct one for this context. So, however, there's a more complicated type of ambiguity the ambiguity that arises from the structure of a sentence. It's called the syntactic ambiguity. So let's see an example. John saw the man on the mountain with a telescope. Who is on the mountain? John, the man, or both? Who has the telescope? John, the man, or the mountain? You know, okay, maybe that doesn't make sense, but you see how it's ambiguous, right? You can read into it different things. There's a funny one. So last night I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got in my pajamas, I'll never know. See the ambiguity here? So this is a line from Groucho Marx, the American comedian. Okay, this is a fun example, but the issue of ambiguity, you know, becomes a real problem when we write documents which are supposed to be clear and unambiguous, like legal documents. Now, here's an example from the American Constitution. Well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, who has the right to bear arms? The people or just the militia? What exactly is a militia? What does the expression to bear arms mean exactly? How was it used historically? What kind of right are we talking about here? How should this passage be interpreted in the context of other passages, and so on? So, you know, both sides in the gun control versus gun rights debate can interpret the text in different ways. They can support their own positions. And that's a problem when we're dealing with very important documents like this, right? So another type of ambiguous language that I wanted to mention here is, you know, the type that the things that are used by all the time by advertising and politics and stuff like this, you know, in order to mislead us, are weasel words. They're called weasel words. The example, you know, a growing body of evidence. When you hear that, you should ask yourself, okay, what body of evidence? Where is the data? Sometimes you'll hear research shows. Which research? You know, you hear all kinds of things. Research shows that frogs can time travel. Where's the research, right? So show me something. People are saying. Which people? How do they know about what they're saying, right? Where did they get the information? It has been claimed. By whom? Where? When? Questions have been raised. This one, you know, implies that there's an important flaw that has been discovered, you know, and when people see that, they're, oh, questions have been raised, there's something wrong. What questions, right? You need to know what they're talking about. It is recommended that. Who is recommending it? Upon what authority? Our product is regarded as, you know, regarded by whom? Award-winning. That's something that you'll see on websites now all the time. You know, what type of award? When was it given? By whom? And usually there's no award. There's just, you know, a kind of logo that they put. You know, award-winning product or something. Then one that's, you know, really prevalent also. Up to 60%. You know, and so what? 59%? 50? 10%? You know, you don't know. So you'll see that also on products and people, you know, claiming that up to 60% of the people have seen an improvement in their health. That doesn't mean anything, right? So, okay, so another type of words which we need to be careful about are absolutistic terms, like all, always, never, everybody, nobody, every, you know, absolutely, exactly, certainly. You know, these words are often used in exaggerations, like, you're always late. I never get what I want. Everybody's doing it. Nobody likes him. We are certainly going to succeed. You know, you need to be careful about this because there are very few instances in our everyday life where using such words would be really appropriate. So most of the time we should use words that acknowledge different degrees of certainty or probability, right? Then related to absolutistic terms are black and white terms or concepts like good or evil, smart or stupid, success or failure, black people versus white people. It's all or nothing. You're with us or you're against us. You know, the famous line of George Bush. So he said, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Yeah, so the problem with these words, again, is that they lead us to believe that there are only two options when in reality there are more. Okay, now I wanted to go into something that's, maybe you haven't heard about this, but bypassing is a concept in general semantics, which says that, you know, meanings are not in words, meanings are in people. So what this means is, so the common view of communication, you know, as you can see here in the image, goes something like this. So there's a sender, someone who sends a message, then there's a receiver who receives it. And the message is made up of words, which are basically vessels that carry meanings, right? When the receiver looks inside the message, he finds the meaning there, which goes into his brain and changes his neural patterns so that the person now knows something new. Well, that's not how it works, right? So it's a bit too complicated to explain right now, all the details, but the simple version is this. When you're speaking, you're doing nothing but move your body in a particular way, right? You're moving your mouth, your tongue, you're making facial expressions, you're, moving your hands if you're Italian, and all the other person is getting is air vibrations, light patterns, and chemicals, none of which have any meanings at all, right? So those things get picked up by the eyes, the ears, the nose, etc., which stimulate certain nerves, which send electrical impulses to the brain, where the meaning actually is, right? So all the meaning is in the brain. It's not in a meaningless, patterns of light or vibrations in the air. So all the meaning the other person thinks he's getting from you, he's actually getting it from himself. He's projecting meaning on all those meaningless things, completely inside his head. There's no meaning outside of a person's brain. So why is this important to understand? Because when you say you're communicating, it gives the idea that you're the one who's doing it and that you're the one who's in control of it. The reality is that you think you're communicating, but actually that's what you think you're communicating is irrelevant. What is relevant is what comes across, right? And that depends completely on the listener, right? On their background, their knowledge, their mindsets, their values, their current mood, and so on. So also this means that you're communicating even when you don't think you're communicating, right? Your absence in certain situations is also a form of communication. Not doing what someone expects you to do is also communicating something. So a better way of thinking about it is not to ask yourself, what am I communicating? But instead ask yourself, how are they interpreting it, right? If you want to improve your communication, you have to learn something about the people you want to communicate with. You have to know how they're going to interpret your meaningless sounds and gestures and how they're going to react to them. And for example, this example about when Jacques joined the Ku Klux Klan, then he dissolved them. He didn't communicate in the way that made sense to him. He communicated in the way that made sense to them, the KKK members. So another important concept I mentioned here is identification. So let's see some examples, right? Roses are red. Well, not if you're colorblind. Sugar is sweet. Well, not for cats. They can't taste sweet, right? Vegetables are healthy. Well, not if you're allergic to them, right? Ants are small. From which perspective? From the perspective of a microbe, they're huge. So, then Einstein was smart, the party was fun. What's the problem here? So in the roses are red, there is no redness in the roses. There is no sweetness in the sugar. There is no healthiness in the vegetables. Those qualities or attributes are not in the objects themselves. They're created by our bodies, by our brains, right? When I look at a rose, the redness is actually created by my own peculiar and unique brain from electrical impulses that are coming from my retina. By unique brain, I mean, that nobody else has exactly the same brain as I do. So obviously it makes sense that we would all perceive the world in a little bit differently from each other, right? So, and the reason this is called identification is because we're identifying our own perceptions about reality with reality itself. In other words, we're equating our personal reactions, descriptions, feelings, thoughts, judgments about an object or an event with the object or event itself. Oh, there's some feedback coming from, okay. Okay, to go back to identification. So we have to be aware, what is important to be aware here is that all our experiences are constructed inside us, inside our brain. Right? So, and since we sense, we experience reality, we symbolize it, differently in our brains. we each experience reality uniquely according to our own individual sensory capabilities, past experiences, past conditioning, background, and so on. So the picture here that you see of the elephant, it depicts the visuals, the story of the blind men who are trying to understand what an elephant looks like. They're trying to touch it. They're trying to find out what it looks like. So even though they're all touching the same elephant, they're describing it differently. You see, someone says it's a wall, it's a fan, it's a spear, it's a snake, it's a tree, because they're experiencing reality from different perspectives. Now, this is just, like a metaphor, right, for what I'm talking here about identification. So, and I put down here, the map is not the territory. You probably also heard this expression from Jacques or from somewhere else. This phrase is just another way to explain the same thing. So people confuse their mental maps with the territory, with reality itself. Okay, so now to avoid this identification, Korzybski is the guy who created general semantics, right, in which Jacques often suggested that we read his book, Science and Sanity, although I think it's a bit too complicated for me, so I didn't read it. I read other things, a more digested version, an easier way to understand this. So what he suggested is that we use, instead of saying, the rose is red, we should say, the rose appears red to me. And Jacques also used the phrase, it seems to me, right? He used that a lot. Now, personally, I'll say this. I think this mostly gets in the way of speaking easily and fluently, but the important thing is to understand the concept and be aware of it in our conversations, right? Okay, so now we know how to use language appropriately. We know what to be careful of and how to express ourselves clearly. But how can we make good arguments? What do we need to know? How do we arrive at rational conclusions? And this is the topic here for the next slide. So, logic and argumentation. They're the most useful and versatile critical thinking skill. The rules of logic and argumentation make the unclear clear, as is shown in the picture. What does that mean? So they clear up our thoughts by exposing irrational ideas, false beliefs, invalid arguments, logical fallacies. The rules of logic and argumentation explain also why some arguments are invalid and how to make valid ones, which is important, if we want to reach our goals more effectively. So the rules of logic can also give us new knowledge from knowledge that we already have without the need for research or experimentation, or from very limited information. Like, for example, think of a doctor making a diagnosis only from his knowledge and your symptoms without the need for a surgical procedure every time to find out what's wrong with you, right? Or think of Sherlock Holmes deducing who the killer is based only on a few clues. So the rules of argumentation, also on the other hand, can make us more persuasive, right? Think of two sides debating an issue. The side that can make better arguments will have an advantage, obviously. So whether we know it or not, we're making arguments whenever we give or evaluate reasons for something. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So what is argumentation? Sometimes people confuse, argumentation with fighting. This is what the word means usually in our everyday lives, right? When we say that we're having an argument. But here, an argument is not at all like that. An argument here means when we give reasons for a conclusion. Like, for example, in this argument here, this is the standard argument that you'll find in all logic textbooks. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. And it's labeled premise 1, premise 2, and conclusion. Now, and this obviously comes from antiquity when people believed in immortal gods living on Mount Olympus and stuff like that. Anyway, so here are 3 important skills to have when dealing with arguments, right? So, standard logical form. How to convert arguments expressed in normal everyday language into standard logical form, like this argument here about Socrates. So standard logical form is how we make arguments clear and explicit. We identify all premises, including the hidden ones. Yes, there are some hidden premises or implied premises, and how we identify the conclusion. Now, the premises are the reasons for the conclusion, right? they tell us why we should believe the conclusion. Once we have the argument in this form, we can proceed to evaluate it. So how to evaluate an argument? When we're evaluating an argument, we need to evaluate two things, right? Truth and logic. What does that mean? Truth, the truth of the premises. Do you agree that the premises are true, right? For example, here, all humans are mortal. Is that true? Yeah. Socrates is human or was human. Yeah, we agree with that. So you need to evaluate the truth of the premises, right? Another thing to evaluate is the logic of the argument. And this really means, does the conclusion follow from the premises, right? Is the conclusion connected to the premises in some way? So then I'll explain logical fallacies. I'll give a few examples of logical fallacies. But basically, logical fallacies are just flawed arguments that can be categorized by the type of flaw, right? So people have been making flawed arguments for thousands of years. So philosophers decided to categorize them and give them fancy names like ad hominem, straw man, appeal to authority, and so on. But don't worry about that. Once you learn the basics of logic, you'll be able to identify fallacies even if you don't know their name. So that's not a problem. Okay, yeah, makes sense, but all this is so abstract. We should have some examples, right? And yes, we do have an example. So let's see this. Let's look at this example. This is an argument that someone might make, right? So TVP and TZM should work together because they have the same goal. Now, this is an example of an unclear argument because even though it's very simple, it's expressed in natural language. The way we speak in our everyday lives, natural language is not very clear, right? So we need to convert it to standard logical form. First, we need to identify the premises and the conclusion. Now, unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go here to explain, all the details about how this conversion works, but I'll say this: the word because tells us that what comes before it is the conclusion and what comes after it is a premise. So here's how we can convert this. So don't worry about the details, this is just to explain, how this process works. Now, there's another thing. The rules of logic tell us that there should be another premise here, but we don't see it. So it's one of those hidden premises that I mentioned earlier. So the result is that, let me gather my thoughts. Yeah, okay. So I can't go into the details, of how this works, but the result will make sense to you. So the hidden premise is this, is the first one. If two organizations have the same goals, then they should work together. This is the hidden premise that is not stated in the other form of the argument. So finally, we have the argument in proper standard logical form. Now we can evaluate it. What we need to do is simply read the premises and the conclusion as three separate statements and decide whether we agree or disagree with them, right? You read them and you say, do you agree with all of them, separately? In this specific case, the premise one, I don't agree with premise one, right? As I said earlier, if two organizations have the same goal, then they should work together. Well, it didn't work for TZM and TVP, and the reason is, they had some disagreements other than just, they wanted to follow different paths, right? So I put it like this: just because two organizations have the same goal, that doesn't mean they should work together, because they may want to achieve the same goal by following different paths, right? By targeting different audiences, by using different methods. In other words, they may have different plans, and that's okay. So I can already say that I'm not convinced by this argument because I don't agree with the first premise. And the first premise is a hidden one, which is important because, it's the one that we discovered by applying the rules of logic. And if we didn't do that, I might have been even convinced by this argument. I might not have seen any problems with it. So really, using logic makes things very clear. It gives you all the premises that are there. Okay, so the second thing is, how do we evaluate the second thing on our list, the logic of the argument, right? Right now, we only looked at the truth of the premises, but how do we evaluate the logic? Now the logic, this is a bit too too complicated to explain here, but I'll make an example which should be very clear. So here we have the example. There's a logical argument that says Paris is in France, France is in Europe, therefore Paris is in Europe. Make sense? Now there's an illogical argument. Paris is in France, France is in Europe, therefore Berlin is in Europe. Okay, so there's a problem here, right? But what's the problem here? So, all the premises and the conclusions here are true, right? So I wanted to show this like this. So, they're all true. If you look at them separately, they're all true. But what's the problem with the second argument, with the illogical argument, is that, the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises, right? So we're talking about Paris and France and Europe, and now suddenly there's Berlin. Where did that come from? So there's a problem with the argument. So the argument is illogical, we could say. Now, the name of this fallacy is fallacy of the 4 terms, because in an argument, you're supposed to have 3 terms, and instead there are 4 terms. But, don't worry about that. That's just an example. Hopefully, the message that I'm trying to get across is that, what does it mean that an argument is logical or illogical? So, but let's see some, I guess, more relevant examples for us. Okay, here's an argument ad hominem. These are logical fallacies, right? There are all kinds of logical fallacies. You can find a whole list of them on Wikipedia and stuff. But the point is, let's make a few examples so that you'll understand what they are. If you don't already know, which you probably do, let's go through this. So here's an argument. Al Gore said climate change is real, but Al Gore is an idiot. Therefore, climate change is not real. So instead of attacking the claim that climate change is real by providing reasons or evidence, the person is attacking Al Gore himself. The problem is that even if you agree that Al Gore is a complete idiot, the conclusion still doesn't follow. So the argument is illogical, right? That's an obvious one, right? And you probably knew about this. But most convincing fallacy that we hear, they're much more subtle, right? It won't be easy to see what's the problem with the argument, even when you write it down in standard logical form. So let's see this example. So nothing is better than a resource-based economy. A ham sandwich is better than nothing. Therefore, a ham sandwich is better than a resource-based economy. Logical, right? Makes sense. So, at first sight, if you don't pay much attention to the words, to the meanings of the words, you might agree with the premises and you might think that the argument is logical because, the conclusion does follow from the premises. But obviously, we wouldn't agree with the conclusion. So what's wrong here? No, the problem is that most people are not aware that the word nothing is ambiguous, right? So in premise 1, the word nothing means nothing else is better than the resource-based economy. Like, take anything else, capitalism, socialism, democracy, the RBE is better than all of those. But in the second premise, the word nothing means the lack of something. If you're starving and someone offers you a ham sandwich, even if you don't like a ham sandwich, it's still better than not eating anything at all, right? So this fallacy is called the fallacy of equivocation because it equivocates on the meaning of the word nothing, right? People usually get fooled by such fallacies because they're difficult to spot, right? Especially, I saw a lot of, these kind of fallacies in the abortion debate. People equivocate on the meaning of the word human or person. But anyway, that's another topic. Just wanted to mention that there are some fallacies which you need to know about them in advance in order really to be able to see them, to spot them. So now persuasion. I don't know what's the time. We're probably running over time. Yes, we are. Okay, a lot. So let me just go quickly through this. Originally I wanted to talk also about rhetoric, and also cognitive biases, which are an important thing. But let's just talk a little bit about persuasion. So at this point, let's say we can connect to people empathically, we can solve conflicts, we can use language appropriately, we can think clearly and make rational arguments. What else do we want? we want to use all that to change people's beliefs and actions. We want to be able to persuade them. So one thing that we need to remember is that tools in themselves are neither good nor bad, right? It all depends on how we use them. So if we want to change the world for the better, build positive relationships, lasting friendships, promote critical thinking skills, and maintain a good reputation, we should only persuade others for good reasons, when both you and the other people stand to gain something from it. So we should avoid persuading with bad reasons, right? With sophistry, manipulation, deception. In fact, we should expose those things and explain the problems with them. So this is a bit of a complicated issue because there isn't always a clear line between persuasion and manipulation, even when we have the best intentions in mind. So, but I'll just leave it at that. Right? That's another topic. So here I'll just explain quickly. So the Cialdini's 6 principles of persuasion. Now, Robert Cialdini, he's the world's foremost expert on persuasion. So he's professor emeritus of psychology and marketing at Arizona State University. He wrote several bestsellers on marketing and persuasion. And if you are interested in these kind of things, I highly suggest, highly recommend his books. So let's go through the 6 principles. So the first principle is reciprocity. People tend to return a favor. That's why you'll get, for example, free samples sometimes in order to persuade you to buy a product. So you can, by knowing this, that people want to reciprocate, you can use the same, technique in order to promote the RBE. You first show that you're willing to give, and then the other person will be willing to give back. Now, second principle, commitment and consistency. Now, when people commit, orally or in writing to an idea or a goal, they're more likely to honor that commitment, because they want to be consistent with themselves. Principle number 3, social proof. You probably heard about this one. It's basically people will do things that they see other people doing. So most people want to conform, right? This may not be very true for us, for people who are skeptical, people who don't want to follow the crowd, but most people do, So when you tell other people, what others are doing, what their peers are doing, their neighbors, they're more likely to do that themselves. Principle of authority. People will tend to obey authority figures, if even they'll do that to a very large, they'll go a long way to do that, even when they're performing objectionable acts. Now, some of you may remember or may know about the Milgram experiments, where people, administered shocks to the participants. It was actually an experiment. Nobody was receiving shocks, but they believed they were administering shocks, and they did it all because, an authority figure, a guy in a white coat, told them to do it, right? So that's the power of authority. Now, the 5th principle is liking. This is probably obvious, right, to everyone. So people are more likely to buy something or like an idea if they like the person that's telling them about it. So, this is also why people like attractive people. Really, when you're using NVC then, and you're, connecting to those people on a deep level, you're basically applying this principle, right? You're making them like you. And this makes you more persuasive than in return. Now there's another one, which is used a lot in today's marketing, is the principle of scarcity. When people perceive that something is scarce, right? There are very few products left or something, that will generate demand, right? They will want it because they will feel, that's something. I'm losing something. I'm losing an opportunity here. I want to get it, right? So, and that's why you'll hear, oh, it's a limited time only offer, right? So get in now in the next 4 days or something like that, right? This encourages sales. So, okay, now to wrap it up. So now you have the tools to go out there, empathize with people, use language appropriately, think clearly, make good arguments, resolve conflicts, and persuade them to promote the RBE, right? So thanks for listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed it and that you got something out of it. You know, I went very quickly through all the topics here, but I'll leave it now open for questions.
Amazing job. Amazing. Anybody have any questions? I really appreciate you, Roberto, honestly, on that note. I remember talking to you like a while back ago, so it's coming back to me on the knowledge that you have, so that's amazing.
Thanks for the compliment.
I'd like to repeat repeat Raul's compliment. It was brilliant. I mean, you were worried about the time, but I think most of us would have listened to you for another half hour. So don't worry about that at all. I did have one question. You said when you were talking about logic, you mentioned an argument that only had one premise and then a conclusion. And then you said, well, there was a hidden premise and every argument should have two premises. Is it possible to have more than two premises, or is that the absolute minimum?
Yeah, no, there can be more. In the example that I used, you know, I can say it like this. Most of the arguments that you'll hear, they will have two premises and one conclusion. This is, you know, most arguments are structured like that. So that's why I made the example like this. But there can be, you know, more than one premises. And you can have, you know, in philosophy, there are whole arguments where you have 12 premises and one single conclusion at the end, you know. So yes, but usually in everyday life, it doesn't happen, right? Usually you have it even has a name because it's so prevalent. It's called a syllogism, right? It's an ancient Greek word for, you know, it means three statements, right? So premise, conclusion. So, but yeah, there can be.
Okay, and another few things, I always make notes during these things. So what I really loved also about what you said about nonviolent communication is that needs are never in conflict and only strategies for meeting these needs are in conflict. And I think that's such an important difference, that people are aware of what basic needs are. And then I'm also thinking about Maslow, you know, so the hierarchy of needs, what are really needs and what we think we need, that these are usually never in conflict. And oh, one thing, when you were talking about the weasel words, yeah. Basically, as a linguist myself, what really popped out about this is that it's almost always in the passive voice. So the subject of the sentence is never really stated. It has been claimed. Research has shown, you know, that the subject is never there. So that's like a signal when you're listening that these things are actually on pretty shaky ground. And the last thing I really thought about, and this was in regard with what Nicholas said once, or somebody else, I don't know, I think I saw it on Facebook one time, but they say, well, communism was also wanted equality, just like the RBE, and communism didn't work. So that means that the RBE will never work, and that's an argument that you hear so much. How would you respond to that?
Okay, so I actually wanted to include that in the in the slides, but then I decided, well, maybe it's it would be too long to include it there. But it's just another type of equivocation, on the word communism. What is meant with the word communism? And I think you explained it very well in your presentation when you talked about the different interpretations of communism. And even if there was only one interpretation of communism, that would still be a fallacy, which would go by the name of what is it? Fallacy. Well, it's another fallacy where basically you're saying, because they have these things in common, so the communism has this, the RBE has this, therefore they're the same thing. It's, one way I usually explain this is not, because if I just say the fallacy or the Latin name of the fallacy, it doesn't mean anything to people. So I just make an example. And the example that I would make is, humans have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Horses have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Therefore, humans are horses. It's the same type of fallacy that you're making. So, just because they have some things in common, it doesn't mean they're the same thing, right? So this is how I would explain it.
Thank you. Good example.
Can I just say quickly, my mom's getting up here. I've got to go take care of her here. But Roberto, thank you so much. It was great listening to you. Really enjoyed it. Great seeing everyone here. I'm going to have to take off. But thank you. It's from Steve.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.
Roberto, can I ask a question? You hear me? Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, great presentation, some good stuff there. I wasn't familiar with Robert Cialdini and the 6 principles of persuasion. I think it's, of course, very important that we learn how to non-violently persuade people. I'm questioning the 6th principle, scarcity. So that in itself is, I think, a manipulative principle. When you're appeasing to somebody's sense of scarcity, then you're inherently manipulating them, and especially since the concepts of an RBE are all about abundance, then do we even use that, or alternatively, do we flip it on its head and talk about abundance rather than scarcity to persuade somebody?
Yeah, okay, thanks. Good question. So, yeah, the way I would put it is, these 6 principles of persuasion is not something that I like or that I think is something that we should use. It's something, it basically explains how our psychology works, right? So, and again, just like any tool, you can use it for good purposes or bad ones, right? So here, we can use all the 6 principles, first to defend ourselves from manipulation, from the media, but also we can use that, to influence others. Now, when things are really scarce, like, I don't know, well, I can't say gold or diamonds or anything because they're not really scarce, we know how that works. But when things are really scarce, like, I don't know, works of art or something, even if it's true that it's scarce, people will want it more, because there's a deep psychological need that people have to, they're feeling they're missing something, that they're losing the opportunity, right? So that's, I guess, then how to, a better way to interpret it for us. When people feel that they're losing something, losing an opportunity, we could put it in terms of the RBE, what we're losing, right? We could now be living in harmony. We could have, like Jacques said, a second Garden of Eden. Instead, we're killing each other off and stuff like this. We're losing a lot of things, a lot of resources and human lives. When you put it in these terms, then, it becomes perhaps more relevant to us, right? But yeah, the principle.
I mean, in terms of maybe altering that for the purposes of an RBE, I might add something like exclusion versus inclusion, because people psychologically want to be included. They don't want to be left out. So I don't know. I'm just thinking, in terms of if we reach a critical mass or a tipping point towards the concepts of an RBE, instead of scarcity, we say, you could potentially be missing out on the greatest, historical evolution ever, So anyway, just some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I could add, it's like Jacques said, sorry, I lost my line of thought. But yeah, like we're losing a lot, right? So we could be living right now, in an automated society where, the robots are doing the work. Instead, we're here slaving off at work from 9 to 5 and all, why are we doing that, right? When you put it in these terms, then it really it appeals to people. It shows them that we are losing a lot, right? We're doing something that's not really needed. So,
right.
yeah.
May I ask you a question, Roberto?
Sure, go ahead.
To clarify my mind about nonviolent communication, on point 1, you referred observation. Is that equal to facts to you?
To facts?
Facts. I'm asking if observate is equal to speak to facts, to enumerate facts.
Okay, it could be also, but what is meant here is more, to avoid making judgments. So when you observe some, we tend to confuse judgments and observations, right? So we do this all the time when we talk about other people. Oh, he's not, he's stupid, or how could he be so, why doesn't he respect me? We tend to confuse that that's not what's actually going on, right? What's actually going on is that person is doing something that we can see with our eyes, hear with our ears, or other sensory organs. And what's going on there is that we're picking that up with our sensory devices, we're processing it, and then we're confusing it with our thoughts, right? We're projecting what that person wanted to do, right? But what we're doing here is called mind reading, right? We can't read other people's minds, so it's better if we just talk about what's going on, what we see, what we perceive, right? Without mixing judgments, evaluations, comparisons and stuff like this.
Okay.
Awesome, perfect. And then Starlet, you're unmuted.
Hey, Roberto, thank you for your awesome communication course for us. And I just have a question. What are 2 common objections you get from skeptics of RBE, and how have you communicated with them effectively that works, that they understand? Can you share 2 of your experiences?
Okay, so the first question is how to reply to skeptics about the RBE when they have some objections to the RBE. Okay, so yeah, here I would go, the most common one is the one that I heard, about communism. So, I think really Charlotte's presentation there explained a lot. So you can see that there are different types of communisms. What the communisms that we saw, that are right now in the world are not the type of communism that Marx actually envisioned, so you could explain that. But I would have to go more into the specifics of what exactly are they objecting, right? Usually they're objecting to that, or to, they say it's human nature, we can't change because human nature. That's one of the really popular ones that I hear around, and there they just need some information of, how things actually work, right? And they need to go through some material to see that it's not actually human nature, right? We're not born bigoted, like Jacques said. So I guess those are the most common ones. If you know anyone, or if anyone else knows any of them that wants to bring up, to address here, go ahead.
Well, Roberto, what information would you actually give them about human behavior? I think that's something that really comes a lot. So what are some points that you would list to just say, well, actually, there is no proof that competition or something like that is human nature? What would you use as a source?
Yeah, okay. I would use the examples of tribes. The tribe that Jacques described is just one of them, right? Where people lived in harmony. They just gave out fish to everyone. They didn't live in competition, and they had a very good life. There's another tribe in Brazil, which is called the Piraha tribe. They are peculiar in their own way. They have a very interesting language, which interestingly is connected to their mentality and everything. And they also don't fight or anything. They live, they're very altruistic in the sense that when sometimes they have hurricanes, or something, or floods, which destroys their houses, they'll just move in with another person who has another house, right? And nobody will object to that. They just expect that. They're all a community. So I would make these kind of examples. If they really want to drill, to the core of the, it's human nature. We're all born this way. No, we're not. There are examples where tribes living this way, and so that wouldn't make sense if it was true that it's human nature, right? But okay, there could be also some other ideas which I'm just not thinking about right now. Let me see. But you had the second question, right? So can you just remind me?
So I have one. A lot of people say, well, how would a society work without money? Does that mean bartering, or yeah, how does that work?
Okay, how do you
with no money?
How do you explain that to people?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now again, this depends on the audience, but I think most people now have at least heard, or the people who are on the internet often, that there is this UBI, universal basic income. So I would go from there, and I would say, even when you look at automation, it just doesn't make sense that there will be much work for people to do, and people are already losing their jobs to automation. So how do we make this work? Why not have technology work for us, right? And they just provide us with what we need, and you don't need to go as far as to say, well, they will give us everything, everyone a castle or whatever they want, right? That's not actually what we want, but some people might interpret it this way. So you should say they'll provide food, need, and shelter, our basic needs. So imagine if you could have your basic needs, fulfilled, and that can happen. That's pretty reasonable to do, right? So what kind of a world do you think would evolve from that, right? So I guess I would explain it from this perspective. But yeah, if anyone else has any ideas of how to approach these questions, just go ahead. I think we can collaborate on giving out good ideas of how to approach certain questions.
I like to use Jacques' example of when he says we'll have thousands of slaves, but they're machines. So from the perspective of the ancient Greek, when they had slaves and they had enormous progress in some areas, and because they were not doing the really hard work, because they were putting slaves to do the hard work for them. So the machines, of course, slavery is pretty terrible, so it's not a thing to consider, but in a resource-based economy, but the machines doing the work for us. And I usually find that people go, okay, machines, but what if the machines take over? So there's always a succession of questions. What seems to me is that it's not really, they're not really interested in, well, it's not really, the problem is that they have many flawed notions. It's not really the knowledge itself, but the structure that they have that is based on, watching movies, robots killing people. There's no knowledge in there. So that's really what seems to be the problem for me.
Yes, it really depends if I'm explaining this to my grandma or to someone else, that's much younger than her, or someone in the KKK or something, So it really depends on their knowledge. When you learn a little bit about them, then it makes it much easier to know how to approach this question and, to really be persuasive in this sense.
Perfect. David, did you have an answer, or did you have a question?
Okay, now you can hear me. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, David.
Okay, that's very good. Yeah, well, mine's not a question, it's just more of a congratulatory comment. Thanks very much, Roberto. That was excellent. I really appreciate that. I learned a lot from that. My personal communications actually fall into a lot of those traps that you mentioned, so I've got a lot of work to do to adjust that to that, using your talk as a filter. One thing I would like to do is to raise the question of the written versus verbal communications. And I know that they're the same. I mean, your talk applies to both of those. With written, you have a lot of time to get things right, to review and to do different drafts. But with verbal, you're on the spot. Okay, so there's a difference in that respect. What I'd like to say is that to get the verbal communications right, you need to have practice. And you know, those questions that were fired at you, Roberto, just before, examples of that. And you know, we all have to be able to rehearse the lists of questions. And so the frequently asked questions on the Venus Project site serve that. So you only need to learn that. It's hard to move people from their established world views, and so you know it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of practice. So again, I'd like to just congratulate you on that talk. It meant a lot to me. Thanks.
Okay, I have to apologize here because the sound for me was a little bit hard to understand. So if there's a question, just let me know. I really had a difficult time understanding here. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. What I wanted to say was just congratulations on that. I will write some questions down as a result of this, and I've been taking notes. So if my sound's not so clear, sorry about that. But there's no questions, just congratulations. Thanks for the talk.
Okay, sure, no problem. Awesome. And it's not a question, Rob, but it's like taking into consideration everything just because the way I think. And the way I'm thinking is like I'm always questioning myself every time I'm thinking about it. So it's like it's almost contradicting yourself because you're thinking about it, but you're thinking about what you're thinking about. And then you're trying to answer like a question. So I guess what I'm trying to get at more or less is like, maybe this is not going to go anywhere, but it's like to give an idea. It's like everyone's trying to like say, well, you have to observe something, you have to learn through experience, but it's like taking into consideration, like, which I don't think a lot of people think about this, but it's that brain. And I don't know if we talked about it or me and Irina, but more or less it's the brain around the environment can't react unless it has an environment to react to, you know? So if taken into consideration that we need to like, I guess, bring up new ideas to change these people that from their experiences and up to the point that we're trying to change them, taking everything into consideration to not manipulate, but like, how would I say, like change their mindset to hopefully see that, well, the way you were living before was because of this, and this is the way we could live. So I guess what I don't know what I'm trying to get at, but it's like, because seriously, I don't know how you would think about it, but it's like, seriously, the brain cannot think without an environment, but it can't think if it's not connected to the receptors, if it's not connected to eyes. Every time you smell something, it's restructuring the connectomes in your brain. So it's like, I don't know if we should take that into consideration every time we are talking to someone to bring an RBE out, if that makes sense. It's not a question, but it's like just thinking about something because of how the brain works. And it's like, well, we can't even think how the brain works unless that brain is in an environment and goes through experiences. So it's like, do you get me what I'm getting at, I guess, in that sense? And it's not a lot of what we're talking about right now, but it's like, it gives me like a thought, like, dang, while you guys are talking, I'm like, oh my God, well, the brain can't do that without this. And it's like, well, we're trying to change people, but it's like every time they smell something, every time they feel something, every time they see something, it's restructuring their own like brain structure in that sense. And it's like they're always changing the way they feel, they're always changing the way they think, but they still have memories and experiences to think back on and then have that decision. I don't know if like we should take that into consideration when we're trying to talk about nonviolence communication, or talking about like some I don't know, Nazi that believes in Nazism, and then we're trying to like say, hey, whatever you're doing up to that point was like, it's because of a mistake in the past or something like that. Like for communication, like honestly, that's why I brought it up, because it's like, well, we're trying to communicate with other people, but how do we not communicate with people, but like how do we understand, well, even if we're trying to communicate with that person, taking into consideration with what you're saying, pretty much like their experiences, where they're coming from, and how we're going to approach them in that way. But just taking that idea, I don't know, just how I thought. But thanks, Roberto.
Okay, I think I would say that you don't necessarily need to think about, you know, how the brain works and how you're changing the brain patterns and so on. You just need to be aware that that's what's going on, right? So, but when you're thinking, you're trying. So personally, I approach things like this. So, you know, when I want to talk to someone and when I really want to persuade them and things like this, I want to know something about their environment. So first of all, I try to create rapport, right? So that's the first thing. That makes you more persuasive and makes you better able to connect with a person, but really connect with a person, not just to manipulate them, to really understand them and where they're coming from. And the reason why I put some of my background there, that I was a religious Catholic, that tells you something about my background, right? About my values. I still retain those values, right? I wanted to be a priest. I was really into that stuff. I didn't change like from this to that to a Satanist or something, right? So this tells you also how you can be more persuasive, right? I told you about everything that I researched about, how I want to promote scientific literacy. So if you want to persuade me, you know that you have to make some good arguments, that you need to appeal to my values also, so I don't want to just, kill off people. If you have some kind of plan that, yeah, let's, delete those people from the planet, will make everything great, or I don't know, if I'm talking to a white supremacist, something like this, so you need to take that into consideration. And you use that in order to convince people, right? I don't think the word persuading or convincing has a negative connotation. I think it's manipulation or coercion that have that negative connotation. So I think you can use that one, right? And
yeah, definitely agree. It's almost going back to sales, I guess. Like form, we use like how do you get to a person's life? Either through the friend starts asking questions, well, how's your family doing? Occupation, or recreation, whatever they're into, or message, or their motto, or their pretty much why they're doing what they're doing because of their message. I guess that's what you're pretty much saying, but that's awesome. Thank you so much, Roberto. And then Nicholas wanted to go. You're good, Nick.
Hury was first, so I'll let him go.
Okay, so it's just an observation, but I would like to propose a view that the language is just a little thing, but from my experience, it seems that language helps a little bit, like the kind of language that you use. Like if you say, it seems to me, it comes from a perspective of, I don't believe in this. It's just that what I'm receiving, from the environment. If we use that meaning if we propose that. So the example of red, like I see red, I would say that is some kind of old language, some kind of old belief system. If we say that we see red, because red doesn't exist outside of the brain. There's no colors in objects. It's just, characteristics on the surface level that bounces certain frequencies and attenuates some others, or bounce to different directions. So it really is flawed. It doesn't make sense at all. But we come from that perspective of, I see red, this is blue. So I would propose that, at least it seems to me that it seems to make sense to try to change the language in that sense, that otherwise would be like kind of carrying this old cultural baggage that doesn't reflect current knowledge, if we spread that knowledge. But more deeply, I see, something I really see is like true belief and opinion. I see a lot of people using that. It's so prevalent and so frustrating to me that people see. It's totally tied to what you were saying in the presentation. That people say, "Oh, my opinion is," or "What is your opinion?" In interviews, what do you think? And that doesn't make sense, because what people think doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to the world, because what you think doesn't change the physical reality. You say, "Wow, gravity," what do you think? It doesn't matter what people think. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. It just happens. It's just coming from the perspective of observing what happens and try to make sense of, well, that's my perspective at least. I'm not saying that is the truth. So there's no really validity in saying, okay, this is my opinion. That is old language that doesn't seem to make sense to me. So that I just wanted to give that perspective of really, I think, I disagree. That comes right through my head when people say I disagree. That means nothing to me, because you disagree doesn't change the facts, right? So it seems like we are full old language that I would propose that is valid to try to change. Makes sense? It's just my perspective,
Yeah.
ultimately.
I guess, I don't want to go into a long philosophical debate right here, but there is, for example, I did say that, I think that the expression, it seems to me, kind of gets in the way. That's because, if you use it too much, it seems to me you're saying this, it seems to me I'm in front of the computer, it seems, kind of in this way. But sometimes, when you want to really make sure that people understand that you're not saying that, oh, that's how it happened, that's, and you want to be sure that they understand that that's just how it appears to you, then yeah, sure. And I also use it sometimes, I learned it from Jacques. So, but as you see, Jacques also doesn't use it all the time, right? Sometimes he says, oh, well, he talks about trees and stuff and, structures. He doesn't say, it seems to me the structure is white. It seems to me, in this kind of way. So this is why I mentioned that. There's, Korzybski, the guy who created general semantics, he also suggested that we should change our language to something that's called E prime, basically to eliminate all kind of language that implies being, right? The word to be, we should get rid of it because, whenever we say that is that, it's not that, right? That appears to us. So, but, there's also, for example, Shakespeare's work translated into E prime, and when the famous soliloquy "to be or not to be," that's also translated in some way, So, but it becomes really confusing then. It's not how we speak right now, right? Maybe if we get into a community, and we all start speaking in this way, it would really take some change in the brain, in the process of how we think about things, to change that. So that's why I don't suggest it. I think it's enough if you're aware of it, if you really understand it and are aware of it. Okay, how are things going on in the background? I'm using the word to be, I'm identifying, but I know that that's not what's actually going on, right? This is just what works with people because, that's how people think in those terms, they have certain maps of the territory. So you're addressing their maps, not the territory itself. So if you understand this, I think this is more useful for us right now here, right? So that's how I approach this. Did it make sense to you?
Yeah. And I think we are aligned. It's kind of a transition. It's right now. It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And if I can just interject one comment as the language expert here, but this is a big discussion point, and I think Nuno talked about it earlier a couple of meetings ago about changing language. And I just want to throw in the idea that actually the change of consciousness is what is going to change the language. You can't change consciousness by changing language. So I'd love to thresh this out with you guys at some future point, but I don't want to take away Nicholas's time because now he's going to say something.
Oh man, the pressure's on. No, I don't have anything super important to say. I found that extremely interesting. Probably one of the most relevant presentations, I think, that we can all apply in our lives. And yeah, I'm kind of getting excited here because I can see the implications of a lot of the things that you talked about. If I manage to get a better understanding of them and apply them in my own personal life and for my activism, etc., I think I can see like a huge opportunity for personal growth here. So I don't know where you've been all this time. Like, I don't think I've seen you in any of these meetings. I might have missed you. I missed a couple. But yeah, I mean, I've done some 2 courses on nonviolent communication, and already in those like 5 minutes, you said stuff that blew my mind. Like, same thing that Charlotte said, that needs never conflict. I'm still like processing that. Like, if I can get an understanding of that, that would be already life-changing for me. Just the way that I would perceive the world and human interactions. So I guess I'd have a million questions. Like for me, I would have sat down all day, forget an hour, listening to this stuff. But I'd be really curious to know where you learned this. Did you actually learn it in physical, like workshops or courses, or did you read it in books? Or I'm just curious how you gathered this knowledge. And then I'd also be curious, you mentioned before, as I said, like, where have you been? Like, you said that you were teaching some kind of course or something. So if you could talk a bit about that. And yeah, I'd be curious just to know about that.
Yeah, okay. So my, the academic stuff that I studied, pharmacy, mathematics, and tourism, that really didn't teach me any of that, right? I learned that by myself. When I learned about, the first time about Khan Academy, that was, oh my God, it blew my mind, right? That's what I want, right? I don't want a teacher that is there in front of the class and is repeating for other people who didn't understand, then is repeating for me, and the other need to listen to, So I was really surprised. It was really life-changing for me when I learned about online courses, right? Then I took a lot of online courses. For me, online courses are the daily bread, right? So even though I don't do them every day, but I take a lot of them, especially on Coursera.com. There are a lot of courses there. There are, on YouTube from many channels, like what are the abridged courses, those short courses, right? From SciShow, for example. So there's a lot of things, and I like, taking those courses. Now, I know those are not, if you can go to a workshop, to a physical workshop, go there, because I think you can internalize much better, right? Because you communicate with other people and everything. On the internet, you can be eating at the same time, maybe listening a little, then you're distracted by Facebook. So, it's not exactly like that. Unless you're a certain type of person. Like personally, when I take courses, I close down Facebook and everything. I don't have anything on my phone. So, I'm immersed in that environment, and, I like learning like that a lot. Surprisingly, it could be surprising that I don't like reading a lot. So I like, listening to the digested versions of other people rather than, reading books. But I do read some books from time to time, when I'm really interested in them. Otherwise I prefer to listen to others because, I like animations and visual stuff. It helps me to understand. So I do it mostly like that. What was the other thing that you mentioned? Am I missing something? What am I doing?
Yeah, if I can just interject 1 second. That's kind of cool to hear because it's the same thing for me. I also, I've just started getting back into the education system now as a mature student, and same, Khan Academy also was absolutely life-changing for me. Like, I actually like maths now, which is ridiculous given how I experienced it in high school. But I also think that how do you say, assimilating information visually and through videos is a lot more efficient than reading it on a page. Like the bandwidth, basically, of information that can be passed is just much faster, more efficient. So I'd be really curious to know if you've got a list. I saw that you had quite a bit of sources. So if that would be maybe the best place to look at, I'll do that. Or if you have any other lists of what got you to this, I'm really curious to know about that. And then, the other part was what you were doing at the moment.
Okay, so the list, I didn't compile in. So the list is just the list of the sources that I used for this presentation, right? But it's, I learned from a lot of sources. For example, for NVC, there's a 9-hour course on YouTube, right? Then there's also a 3-hour course. I took those, right? And they're just audio. There are others where, it's Marshall Rosenberg himself speaking to an audience and stuff like this. So, I took those, I listened to those. Then I read the book also, Nonviolent Communication, The Language of Life. That's one of the books that I read. There are many others that I have on my computer, but I'll probably never read them. I just like collecting them or something. So, and mostly I can say YouTube is what I watch the most. And the thing is, repetition. I think it's important. So spaced repetition. This is something that you could do for education, and the flashcards that you use in order to learn new words, for example. You do the same thing with concepts, right? I would listen, to Marshall one day. Then after a few days, I would, re-listen to that or to something similar, to another video, and then after a month. So basically it's spaced, right? And, but the thing is, it makes you remember and understand more, because if you just listen everything in one day, then, you don't create many connections in your brain. Only after you have, you need some time to have some experiences in order for you to see how that is relevant to you in your life, and so that you can understand it better, right? When I first listened, for example, when I first watched Zeitgeist Moving Forward, the second one, Zeitgeist Addendum, I saw about, the risk-based economy, Jacques Fresco talking about there. I didn't do anything about that, right? I was like, sure, that's interesting, but I didn't think to join it. I didn't think to do anything. It was only after I saw some other things from other documentaries, then I got back to it, so I really needed like a couple of months in order to really get into it and to say, okay, wait, I'm kind of misjudging here how important this is, right? So it took me quite a while and quite some experiences in my life, to see how things work and how that makes more sense. Then I got back to it, so at least that's how it works for me, right? You need some time. It's a kind of a long-term process, long-term, learning. It's not something that, I don't like taking courses like one course in a day and I'm there for 8 hours or something, Sometimes I do that, but usually I don't, because, it's not very efficient. I think when you spread it over time, it becomes much more, I can internalize it much better. The other thing about the courses that you mentioned, so yeah, I am working with, it's called iditra.org. It's, an organization that it mainly works in Brazil, there are Brazilian people there, and Huri, you're also one of them, right? So yeah, so we're creating courses there, that would go from the basics to the to the more important stuff, the stuff that I talked about here, right? We're starting from basic stuff, like the thing that you learned in Zeitgeist, or, the TVP documentaries, that's more basic, to address the people who are not so, what should I say, so awake, right? So, and then to get them progressively more and more tools to use in their lives in order to improve it and to get to better society and so on. So, yeah, if you have anything else, just go ahead. I don't know if I addressed all of your points.
So the courses that you're doing in Brazil, they're on location, I guess, like they're not online.
Oh, no, they are online, yeah.
Oh, they are, okay.
Yeah, I just meant that most of the people there are from Brazil, right? So we're doing courses both in English and Portuguese, right? So just wanted to mention there, because it's not all an all English group, right? So it's not going to be so. We're not going to create the courses so quickly, right? So we'll need more time. Just wanted to mention that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much again.
So I had a question, not a question, but like in your thinking process, because I think this is freaking amazing, guys. I feel like if we were in a room together, that energy would just shoot up to the stratosphere right now, honestly. So Rob, like thinking about the environment and thinking about how the world is. So I'm like, because in my train of thought, I'm like, I want to make a resource-based economy as soon and as quick as possible. So taking into everything that I've learned today and everything that we're doing right now, it's like, okay, well, it's not that we need every single person in the world to change their thought right away, but if we change as, just take an example of like how many people maybe believe in a resource-based economy is like 60 million or maybe a little bit more that know about it, maybe not believe in it. So if we take it to that number, say like 10 million people, or even 10% of that, 1 million people come together with this train of thought, how we're thinking. And it's not that we need to change everyone's thinking in like the next year, but I honestly think in like the next year, thinking about everything, and it's just a thought, but if I work towards this goal, I think we can make it a freaking reality, even if I miss short from it. Meaning, so it's not that we need to change every single person right now, But if we change their environment and have, like, say, 1 million people think the way we think right now, to the extent of our own individuality or whatever, but still have that critical thinking, scientific thinking behind and being aware of what we're doing, do you think we could make a quicker change into an RBE? Because I know I call it the transition. Like we're going into the transition. We're in the transition. We're not going to be fully immersed in a resource-based economy, but it has to start somewhere, or it could start every single part in small little communities all over the world. But wouldn't it be more powerful to figure out a way? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't want to like reveal everything right now, but it's like could be ways in like the next year, get a group of people. I think it's better to do it in the United States or anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. But come together, live in a freaking warehouse, or live wherever the hell we want to live, and literally start that process. And because we know that how we are thinking and what we're doing is hopefully pursuing into that goal, or that worthy ideal of a goal, the progression of what we are working towards, if that makes sense. Or if I'm like going off a little, but it's just like, seriously, I want to change this world as soon as possible. So how are we going to do that? And it's
if I could jump in here, because you fed into exactly what I was thinking about, and that's number one, the notion that there is a critical mass or a tipping point that they've researched, and they say it's generally you need 10% of a population to believe something, and then it can flip the whole paradigm. But also, you're alluding to the notion that, you know, somebody was talking about communicating to white supremacists, or maybe religious fundamentalists. There are different, let's call them levels or stages of consciousness. Charlotte, getting to what you were talking about, and we are all not at the same place, and we have different worldviews. And so to try to speak to maybe a very conservative, traditional fundamentalists, I think we're wasting our breath. We're not going to convince somebody who actually does think in absolutistic black and white terms. And I'd be happy to present on this at some later time, but there are different, levels or stages of consciousness that not only individuals go through, but entire civilizations. So, but roughly the culture wars that we're going through now are between the traditional stages of consciousness, the modern rational stages of consciousness, and the postmodern stages of consciousness. So we're, to try to, you could almost make the argument that it's actually not compassionate to try to talk to a religious fundamentalist who literally cannot wrap their heads around what we're talking about. And they won't get that, okay? So instead, we need to focus all of our energy and communication towards reaching the postmodern, world-centric people who are already thinking in the same terms as we are, but they just haven't been approached with the notion of an RBE. But if we can get them convinced, then that's the tipping point. That's the critical mass that we need. So, just my thoughts.
Awesome.
Yeah, if I can add something, do you remember the list of things that I had in one of the slides where I said, different people are trying to reach the RBE in different ways, promoting different things, doing different stuff. So, I don't really take a stance that any of them is better than the others, right? I think that all of them play a part in reaching the resource-based economy. So I don't know which one will be the nail in the coffin, the one that will actually have the most impact, right? So I can't say do this because this will have the most impact. I don't know which one, right? So I'm doing simply what I'm most interested in, right? I'm interested in education, in talking about communication, improving people's skills. So that's what I'm doing, right? If I was interested in building a community, I would do that, right? And I mean, that is also very interesting to me. And here in Editra, you know, they do have in Brazil a house that they're using in order to, you know, try out different technologies, make it as automated as possible. So I'm also supporting that, and I want to see what happens there, right? So yeah, but there are many different things, right? As I said, so I don't know which one is the best one or the right one to do. So I support all of them. And yeah, just wanted to mention that.
All right.
Hey, so I agree with all what you guys are saying, and I was trying to reach out to Nicholas. One of the things that changed my life and changed my consciousness, and that's why I say therefore it changes my language, is taking this course called Landmark Worldwide. You can find them on landmarkworldwide.com, and it's really exactly what you're saying. There is the first course, which is the forum. Then basically it goes through how what you're saying, that our brain is what confuses us. And it's like this machine that's nonstop, and we have to stop it and then realize that we have control over it. And then once you understand who you are and how you talk to yourself, then there's a course that's called the advanced course, where you realize we are no different from the black guy next to us or the white guy next to us, and we're all one, and we have the same needs. And then upon that, you take this communication course, which is exactly what you're talking about, is how do we communicate in an effective way where the other person's point of view is the most important. So to be effective, we have to understand their point of view and upbringing. And that's an actual course that changed my life in the past 2-3 years, and they have it worldwide. And so there might be a class in Ireland. I didn't have time to check, but I know they have it in UK. And that's a whole course that I've been on this journey for about 2 years. And then after you do that, you actually practice those principles in real life, and you do real life projects. And you get to choose whatever you are passionate about. And so like for me, I'm passionate about RBE. And so I've been trying to get that information out to as many as people as I can in my community. And those are all the different resources I get from Landmark Worldwide. As a matter of fact, Steve Jobs took that course himself when he was ousted from his own company, and then he came back and took back control. So you can see that how it's transformed a lot of people in this world. And the goal of the Landmark is that to have no more wars in this world, that we will all live in peace. So I find it very cohesive to the RBE idea, and that it's a great resource. Just want to put it out there to Nicholas and then everybody else that's interested, and it's all over US, so it's huge. Oh, and another thing that I find really close to what we're talking about is people who are into conflict resolutions. So I've been going to a lot of festivals, and in festivals I meet a lot of these people, and they specialize in conflict resolution. And it's exactly the principles that you're talking about, how to understand other people's point of view. And having conversations with these people really opened my mind up to what is really needed in this world right now, which is understanding. And like you said, the need is what we need to focus on, not the strategy. We can understand each other's strategy, but we don't have to agree on it. But as long as we have the same intention and the same goal, we will eventually get there together one day. So I just want to share that.
Thank you so much, Jen. Roberto, we're running on like 2 hours. Did you want to add anything else?
Well, let me just say thank you for giving me the honor to present here. Right, now that you know, I heard from you, I see that we have a lot of things in common. So, and I really appreciate everything that you said. You know, so yeah, I'm looking forward to working more with you. Right, so right now I'm very busy with those courses. So you know that's why I don't appear much. You know, in the meetings, as you said, Nicholas. So because I'm working on those things. But yeah, sure. If we can work, especially if we want to work on something together, if there's a project that you guys want to start or something, you know, I'm interested in that. I want to see, you know, I'm open to the possibilities. So yeah, thank you again for having me here.
Awesome, Roberto. Just to keep everyone in mind, thank you so much to Roberto. Honestly, it was a pleasure. It was an honor to actually see this presentation and get to know you more. And everyone that took their time out, and everyone that's going to watch this in the future on the pre-recorded videos. In the future here on October 15th, the 10th Zoom meeting will be in the next 2 weeks. And then after that 2 weeks is another 11th Zoom meeting. And I think by November, we should have another RBE talking session. I forget what it is, like a RBE and chill session, if you really think about it, where we all come together, get to know each other, and actually go into ideas, experiences, any questions that you wanted to have in the past. And also go on Discord. And if you want to take this discussion, I know we can't take it any longer, but take this discussion to Discord. Any question that you have, there's a voice channel that you could literally talk with someone, just like how we're talking, just not face-to-face, over the phone, if you really think about it. Roberto, you could go on it, and if anybody has any questions, they could ask questions there. But thank you so much, guys. If anybody doesn't want to add anything else.
And if I could just jump in here, yeah. The meeting on the 15th is about permaculture and agricultural planning. So that's a very important aspect of the holistic aspect of an RBE. And at the end of the month, the last meeting of October is with Perry Gruber, I think his name is, from Copiosis. And I'm extremely interested in hearing those ideas. I've been hearing from various channels that there are some very good ideas that he's come up with. So that's why, Nicholas, we don't have a social meeting in October. We've got 3 presentation meetings. So the next social meeting, that would be the 2nd weekend of November. And then we can just talk with everybody. And Roberto, in case you didn't catch what Raul was saying, we have a discourse channel. And after the presentations, we like to set up a chat room for the subject of the last presentation. So if you're able to be there sometimes, then you can answer questions directly. Okay, thanks, Raul.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. It was an honor to have everyone on here. Thank you so much, Roberto. And have a blessed day. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks.